Tom Miller stood at the observation deck of Space Station Delta, watching the endless stream of ships coming and going through the docking tubes. His reflection in the reinforced glass showed a man in his mid-40s wearing the bright yellow safety uniform that made most other species roll their eyes. The silver safety inspector badge on his chest caught the light of the nearby star, reminding him of his duty, even if nobody else took it seriously. "Safety Inspector Miller, your presence is required in Docking Bay 12, the station's AI announced through his personal communicator. A Thoraxian trade vessel is requesting clearance for emergency repairs. Tom sighed, already knowing what he would find. The Thoraxians, like most warrior species in the Galactic Alliance, considered safety protocols a sign of weakness. They would rather patch their ships with whatever they had on hand than follow proper repair procedures. As he walked through the station's curved corridors, members of various alien species moved out of his way. Not out of respect. Far from it. The yellow uniform marked him as one of those overcautious humans who always slowed things down with their endless safety checks and backup plans. A group of towering Thoraxians waited at Docking Bay 12. Their crystalline bodies glowed with barely contained annoyance as Tom approached. The captain, distinguished by his deeper purple color, stepped forward. "We demand immediate docking clearance," the captain's translator boomed. "Our ship needs minor repairs. We can complete them in 10 minutes. Tom pulled out his scanner, ignoring the captain's impatient grinding of crystal appendages. "Standard procedure requires a full safety scan before any vessel with damage can dock with Station Delta," he explained, keeping his voice professional despite knowing what would come next. "Typical human cowardice," one of the crew members spat. "In the Thoraxian fleet, we dock with half our ship on fire if we must. We don't hide behind scanners and protocols." Tom continued his scan, the device beeping as it detected exactly what he feared. "Your engine is leaking quantum plasma. If you try to repair that without proper containment, you risk irradiating half the station." He looked up at the towering aliens. "I'm directing you to External Repair Bay 3. We have specialized equipment there for handling quantum plasma leaks safely." The Thoraxian captain's crystals turned a dark red. "This is an insult. We've handled hundreds of plasma leaks in combat. We don't need your human safety measures." "Nevertheless," Tom stated firmly, "it's station protocol. No exceptions." He'd learned long ago not to back down, even when faced with angry alien warriors 3 times his size. As he escorted the grumbling Thoraxians to the external bay, he passed Ann Walker, the station's xenobiologist. She was one of the few who understood his dedication to safety. She gave him a knowing smile as she carried her research samples, each one properly contained and labeled according to human protocols. Later that day, in the station's busy dining hall, Tom sat reviewing the day's inspection reports on his tablet. The room buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, most of them complaining about human safety measures. At a nearby table, a group of energy beings flickered in amusement as they watched him work. "Look at him," one pulsed to another, checking reports during mealtime. "Humans always prepare for problems that will never happen. I heard they have backup plans for their backup plans." Another energy being flickered. "No wonder they're considered the most cautious species in the Alliance." Tom ignored them, focusing instead on some unusual energy readings his sensors had picked up near the Crimson Nebula. Something about the pattern seemed off, but he knew nobody would listen if he raised concerns now. They never did, until it was almost too late. He made a note to check the readings again tomorrow, and run some additional scans. Other species might call it paranoid, but 20 years of experience had taught him that space held too many dangers to take anything for granted. As he finished his meal, the station's massive window offered a view of the Crimson Nebula in the distance. Its swirling red clouds seemed to pulse with an odd rhythm today. Tom Miller might have been called a coward by every warrior race in the Alliance, but he knew something they didn't. Sometimes the real heroes were the ones willing to look foolish to keep others safe. The energy readings from the nebula flickered again on his tablet, like a warning that only the cautious would notice. 3 days had passed since Tom first noticed the strange energy readings from the Crimson Nebula. He sat in his small office, surrounded by screens showing safety data from across Space Station Delta. The numbers from his latest scan made his stomach turn. "Computer, run the analysis again," he ordered, rubbing his tired eyes. The results came back the same. Energy spikes increasing by 47% every 12 hours. The office door slid open with a soft hiss. Ann Walker walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her research uniform was wrinkled from a long day in the lab. "You look worried," she said, placing 1 cup on his desk. "Those readings from the nebula." Tom nodded, turning one screen so she could see. "Look at this pattern. It's like nothing I've ever seen before." He pointed to a graph showing wild spikes of energy. "And it's getting stronger." Anne leaned closer, her eyes widening. "That can't be natural. Have you reported it?" "Tried to. 3 times. Tom took a sip of coffee. "Commander Ross said I was being typically human about it. The Security Council won't even look at the data." As if to prove his point, the office door opened again. Commander Ross's scaled form filled the doorway, his reptilian features set in an expression of annoyance. Behind him stood Chief Engineer Parker, his insectoid arms crossed. "Miller," Ross growled, "I've received complaints about you denying docking rights to 3 ships today." Tom pulled up the relevant scans. Their shields were showing microfractures. "With these energy spikes from the nebula, it's not safe to." "Enough." Parker's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Always with the nebula. There's nothing wrong out there. Your human sensors are malfunctioning. I've cross-referenced the data." Anne spoke up. "The readings are real. As a xenobiologist, I'm seeing concerning changes in the behavior of space-dwelling organisms near that sector." Commander Ross's tail swished in agitation. "The Security Council has already dismissed these concerns. We're warriors, not cowards who jump at shadows." "Being careful isn't the same as being cowardly," Tom said firmly. "Something is building up out there. If we don't prepare." "Prepare, prepare, prepare," Parker chittered. "That's all humans ever want to do. While you hide behind your safety protocols, real warriors face challenges head-on." After they left, Tom turned back to his screens. He began typing rapidly, creating new safety procedures for the growing crisis only he and Anne seemed to see coming. "They're not going to authorize any of these protocols, you know," Anne said, watching him work. "No," Tom agreed, "but I'm implementing them anyway. Starting with power grid backups and emergency shelter preparations. You could lose your job. Better than losing lives." He showed her another screen. "Look at these readings from the station's outer sensors. The energy pattern. It's almost like it's alive." Anne studied the data, her scientific training kicking in. "It's not just random spikes. There's a sequence here." She pointed to recurring patterns in the numbers. "It's building toward something." For the next few hours, they worked together. Tom updated evacuation routes and checked emergency systems, while Anne analyzed the nebula's changing patterns. Neither spoke about how the other species would react to their cowardly preparations. Late that night, as most of the station slept, a new alarm flashed on Tom's screen. The energy readings had jumped again, bigger than any previous spike. "Computer, show me the nebula," he commanded. The view screen lit up with an image that made both humans freeze. The usually red clouds of the Crimson Nebula now pulsed with bright white light. Waves of energy rippled outward like a heartbeat. "We need to start implementing these safety measures now," Tom said quietly, "whether they authorize them or not." Anne nodded, already pulling up her own research data. "I'll help. Someone has to be ready when whatever's out there decides to wake up." Through the office window, they could see the nebula's glow growing brighter. The warrior races might mock human caution, but as the strange light pulsed across space, Tom knew their careful planning might be all that stood between the station and disaster. The question was, Would anyone listen before it was too late? The emergency alarms blared through Space Station Delta at 300 hours. Tom Miller ran down the corridor toward the main control room, his yellow safety uniform reflecting the red warning lights. Behind him, Ann Walker carried a tablet displaying the latest readings from the Crimson Nebula. They burst into the control room to find chaos. Commander Ross stood at the central console, barking orders as various alien species rushed around. The massive view screen showed the nebula, now blazing with white-hot energy that made the sensors scream. Energy levels are off the charts, an operator shouted. The nebula's radiation has increased by 800% in the last hour. Commander Ross's scales bristled. Ready the defense fleet. We'll show this space anomaly how the warrior races deal with threats. Wait, Tom pushed forward, pulling up his data. Commander, this isn't a normal spatial phenomenon. Look at these patterns. He displayed the analysis he and Ann had been working on. It's a quantum cascade failure. If we attack it... Silence. Ross's tail lashed angrily. We don't need human cowardice now. The Council has already voted. The combined fleet will launch in 20 minutes. Ann stepped forward. Her voice steadied despite her fear. The quantum readings suggest any energy weapons will make it worse. We need to evacuate the nearby sectors immediately. Chief Engineer Parker skittered across the ceiling in agitation, his insectoid eyes glowing. Evacuate. That's your solution. No. We are warriors. We strike first. Tom watched in horror as the defense fleet assembled. 20 ships from different warrior races, each armed with the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. They were about to make the biggest mistake possible. At least let me implement the emergency protocols, he pleaded. We've prepared. Your protocols will only slow us down, Ross growled. Security, escort these humans back to their quarters. But before the guards could move, the nebula pulsed. A wave of quantum energy washed over the station, making the lights flicker. In that moment, Tom made a decision that would change everything. He slammed his emergency override code into the nearest console. Throughout the station, blast doors began closing. Emergency power systems kicked in. Backup life support activated. All the preparations he'd been secretly making sprang into action. What are you doing? Ross roared. Stop this immediately. Computer, Tom called out clearly. Implement Emergency Protocol Omega. Authorization. Miller 7 Delta 9. Ann quickly added her own authorization code, activating the scientific containment measures they'd prepared. Around them, the station began transforming into the fortress they'd designed it to be. Through the view screen, they watched as the defense fleet approached the nebula. Tom's hands clenched into fists. They're going to trigger a cascade, he whispered. The first ship fired its main weapon. A beam of pure energy struck the swirling clouds of the nebula. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the universe seemed to tear itself apart. The nebula exploded outward in a wave of quantum energy. The first 3 ships simply vanished, their matter scattered across dimensions. The others tried to retreat, but the cascade was faster. Full power to the quantum shields, Tom shouted. His excessive safety measures had included upgrading the station's shielding, though he'd been mocked for wasting resources. The wave hit them. Every light on the station went dark. In the total blackness, only Ann's tablet still glowed, powered by its independent battery, another of their unnecessary precautions. Backup power online, the computer announced as emergency lights flickered on. Tom's upgrades had worked. They weren't dead. Yet. Commander Ross stood in shocked silence, staring at the view screen. Where the defense fleet had been, now only quantum fire burned. The nebula had transformed into a roiling mass of reality-breaking energy, spreading outward at terrifying speed. Status report, Tom called out, falling back on his training. 15 ships lost with all hands. Ann read from her tablet. The cascade is affecting 3 star systems already. But the station's holding. She looked up at the alien council members. The quantum shields are containing the radiation. Ross turned to Tom, his reptilian features unreadable. What do we do now, Safety Inspector? Tom met the commander's gaze steadily. Now, sir, you let us show you why humans always prepare for the worst. He turned to Anne. Get me everything you have on quantum cascade containment, and tell them to ready the evacuation ships. The storm hadn't even begun. Space Station Delta shook as another quantum wave hit its shields. Inside the main control room, chaos had turned to focused desperation. Tom Miller stood at the central command station, surrounded by screens showing the spreading disaster. Status report. Commander Ross called out, his scaled skin pale with stress. 3 more stations in the Proxima sector just went dark, and reported from her station. The quantum cascade is spreading faster than we predicted, but our shields are holding. The view screen showed a terrifying sight. Where the Crimson Nebula had once been, now a storm of purple-white energy rage, consuming everything in its path. Ships trying to flee the affected sectors kept disappearing, their matter scattered across dimensions by the quantum waves. Station Delta is now the only surviving command center in this sector, Chief Engineer Parker announced, his insectoid mandibles clicking nervously. We're receiving distress calls from 17 different worlds. Tom pulled up the evacuation protocols he'd prepared. We need to start moving people now. The cascade will reach the populated systems in less than 6 hours. Move them where? Ross demanded. There are billions of people in those systems. Here, Tom said, displaying a map. I've mapped out safe corridors based on the cascade spread pattern. Anne's research shows the quantum effect moves like a fluid. We can predict where it will go. He highlighted several sectors. These areas will stay safe the longest. We need to coordinate the evacuation fleet now. The alien council members, who had once mocked human caution, now crowded around his displays. Their warrior pride had crumbled in the face of an enemy they couldn't fight. How did you know to prepare for this? One of them asked. We didn't, Anne answered, still monitoring the cascade spread. Humans just prepare for everything. What you call cowardice, we call survival. Suddenly, alarms blared again. A new wave of quantum energy surged toward the station. The lights flickered as the shields strained to hold. Hull stress at 89%. An operator shouted, We can't take many more hits like that. But Tom smiled slightly. Activate secondary shield grid, he ordered. Everyone stared as a second energy barrier sprang to life around the station. The next quantum wave hit it and dispersed harmlessly. A backup shield. Parker chittered in disbelief. When did you install this? Last week, Tom said, already moving to the next task. Along with triple redundant life support, emergency power systems, and enhanced communication arrays. Standard human safety protocols. Commander Ross stepped forward, his tail twitching with newfound respect. What do you need from us, Safety Inspector? Tom brought up his evacuation plans. Every ship that can still fly needs to be redirected to these coordinates. We have 6 hours to move as many people as possible out of the cascade's path. He turned to Anne. What about containment? She displayed her research data. The cascade follows quantum probability paths. If we can set up enough quantum dampeners at these points, she highlighted several locations, we might be able to guide it away from populated areas. That's a massive undertaking, Parker noted. It would take months to. Check Cargo Bay 3, Tom interrupted. I requisitioned quantum dampeners last week. Listed them as routine safety equipment. The control room fell silent as the implications sank in. All those years of human overcaution, all those unnecessary safety measures, had prepared them for exactly this moment. Direct all incoming ships to these coordinates, Tom ordered, highlighting safe zones on the map. Anne, start coordinating the dampener deployment. Commander Ross, we need every available communication channel to spread evacuation orders. As the others rushed to comply, Tom looked out at the quantum storm raging through space. They had lost the defense fleet and 3 stations because warrior races wanted to fight. Now it was time to see if human caution could save what was left. His console beeped with an incoming message. More distress calls, more people needing help. Tom straightened his yellow safety uniform and got back to work. The warriors had failed, but the galaxy was about to learn why humans always planned for the worst. In the distance, the quantum cascade continued to spread, but now it faced an enemy it had never encountered before. Human preparation. The next 12 hours on Space Station Delta became a masterclass in human emergency management. Tom Miller stood in the newly established Crisis Command Center, which had once been the station's secondary cargo hold. His unnecessary backup command center was now the heart of the largest evacuation in galactic history. Quantum dampener network is at 60% coverage. Anne called out from her station. She hadn't slept in 20 hours, but her voice remained steady. The cascade is starting to follow our projected containment paths. Around them, aliens of all species worked at stations designed with human safety protocols in mind. Commander Ross watched in amazement as Tom coordinated hundreds of rescue ships through predetermined escape routes. Transport Group 7 reports success, an operator announced. 2 million refugees safely moved to Haven Point Alpha. Tom nodded, checking his screens. The evacuation map showed green lines where ships could safely travel and red zones where the quantum cascade made space travel impossible. All of it followed the patterns he and Anne had predicted days ago. "How many backup routes did you plan?" Ross asked, watching as Tom redirected a convoy away from a sudden quantum surge. 47, Tom replied, not looking up from his work, with 3 alternate paths for each route, and emergency supply catches hidden along the way. Parker, who had once mocked human caution, now worked frantically to implement Tom's backup systems across the station. These redundant power grids, the insectoid engineer chittered in excitement. They're brilliant. 3 separate systems, each capable of running the station alone. Standard human design, Tom said. We always build backup systems for our backup systems. The station shuddered as another quantum wave hit their shields. But this time, no one panicked. The humans had prepared for this too. Switching to shield configuration Delta, Anne announced calmly, rotating frequencies to match cascade patterns. The shield strength actually increased after her adjustments, making several alien engineers buzz with surprise. Send these shield modifications to all evacuation ships, Tom ordered. Priority to those carrying civilians. A new alarm sounded, but before anyone could react, Tom was already moving. He pulled up a hidden menu on his console, revealing yet another backup system. Secondary communication array online, he announced, switching all rescue coordination to backup channels. You had a whole second communication system ready, Ross asked in disbelief. Third, actually, Tom corrected him. The second one was damaged in the first wave. That's why we always have multiple backups. Anne's station suddenly lit up with new data. Tom, the quantum dampeners are working better than expected. Look at this pattern. Everyone gathered around her display. The cascade's energy was being funneled away from populated systems, following the paths created by their dampener network. It's like a controlled burn, Tom explained to the confused aliens. On Earth, firefighters sometimes fight fires by directing them away from populated areas. We're doing the same thing with quantum energy. You learned this from fighting fires? Parker asked, mandibles twitching in confusion. We learned this from being careful, and corrected, from studying problems before they happen and preparing solutions in advance. The main screen showed their progress. Billions of lives saved, countless ships guided to safety, all because 2 humans had insisted on preparing for disasters that seemed impossible. New reading from Sector 7. An operator called out. The cascade is weakening where it contacts the dampener field. Tom and Anne shared a look. This was what they'd hoped for, but hadn't dared predict. Order all available ships to begin deploying the reserve dampeners, Tom commanded. Focus on these coordinates. He highlighted several points on the map. We're not just going to contain this thing. We're going to stop it. Commander Ross stepped forward. What do you need from us? We need every ship that can navigate the quantum waves to help deploy dampeners, Anne explained. It's dangerous work. But let me guess, Ross interrupted, his scales rippling with what might have been amusement. You have safety protocols for that too. Tom finally allowed himself a small smile. Full protective procedures, equipment loadouts, and emergency extraction plans, all prepared last week. Around them, the alien crew members who had once ridiculed human caution now moved with new purpose. They had learned what humans had always known. True strength lies not in fearlessly charging into danger, but in being ready to face it when it comes. The quantum cascade still raged through space, but it no longer faced disorganized resistance. Now it faced humanity's greatest weapon: preparation. Hour 36 of the crisis found Space Station Delta transformed. The once mocked human safety systems had turned it into the last bastion of hope for an entire sector of space. Tom Miller hadn't slept in 2 days, but he remained focused on the screens before him, watching as the quantum dampener network slowly caged the cascade. Final dampener group in position, Anne announced, her voice hoarse from giving constant updates. Network completion at 98%. The main view screen showed their achievement: a vast web of quantum dampeners creating a controlled barrier around the cascade. The purple-white energy that had devoured whole star systems now swirled in contained patterns like a caged storm. Ready for containment phase, Tom said, bringing up the procedures he'd designed. All ships maintain safe distance. This has to be done slowly. Commander Ross, who hadn't left the command center since the crisis began, leaned forward. Slowly? The cascade is still threatening 3 populated systems. If we rush this, Anne explained, pulling up her simulations, the quantum energy could rupture the entire network. We have to let physics work at its own pace. Tom nodded, beginning the careful process they planned. Initiating dampener sequence alpha. Power at 10%. On the screen, the nearest dampeners began to pulse with soft blue light. The quantum cascade reacted immediately, its energy swirling and fighting against the containment field. 15 minutes until next power increase, Tom announced. Everyone hold position. Chief Engineer Parker skittered nervously across his station. The warrior races would have tried to crush it with full power immediately. And they would have failed, Anne said, monitoring the quantum readings. Look at the energy pattern. It's like a wounded animal. Push too hard, and it lashes out. Guide it gently, and it follows the path of least resistance. Tom finished, increasing power to 20%. Hour by hour, they continued the slow process. The quantum cascade fought against their containment, but each careful power increase drew the net tighter. Ships from across the galaxy watched in amazement as human caution accomplished what warrior might could not. Power at 60%, Tom announced. Anne, how are the readings? Cascade energy decreasing by 3% per hour, she reported. It's working, Tom. The containment field is actually draining it. Suddenly, alarms blared. A section of the dampener network flickered, weakened by the cascade's constant pressure. Network breach imminent in Section 7. An operator shouted. The quantum energy is. Activate backup dampeners, Tom cut in calmly. Standard safety protocol. Everyone stared as a second line of dampeners lit up behind the failing section. Tom had installed reserves, just in case. Of course you had backup dampeners, Commander Ross said, shaking his head in wonder. Do humans prepare for everything? No, Anne answered, managing a tired smile. We just prepare for anything we can think of. Power at 70%, Tom. The next few hours moved with careful precision. The quantum cascade's violent energy gradually dulled, contained by human ingenuity and patience. Ships began returning to their normal routes. careful to follow the safety corridors Tom had established. Final power increase, Tom announced, taking containment field to 100%. The command center held its breath as the dampener network reached full power. On the main screen, the once terrifying cascade shrank into a controlled sphere of quantum energy. Cascade contained and reported, checking her readings twice. Energy levels dropping steadily. "We did it, Tom." A cheer went up around the command center. Species that had once sneered at human caution now celebrated the victory it had brought them. "Begin Phase 2, Tom ordered, already moving to the next step in his plans. "We need to establish permanent containment facilities and start rebuilding the affected sectors." "Let me guess," Ross said. "You already have plans for that too." Tom pulled up another set of detailed procedures on his screen. "Drafted last week, with triple redundancies, of course." As the celebration continued around them, Anne moved to Tom's station. "They're not calling us cowards anymore," she observed quietly. "No," Tom agreed, watching the contained cascade pulse harmlessly in its cage of human innovation. "But we would have done the same even if they still did. Because that was the real strength of humanity. Not that they prepared for the worst, but that they did so regardless of what others thought." And now the galaxy understood why. 1 month after the quantum cascade crisis, Space Station Delta hosted an unprecedented gathering. The Grand Chamber, usually reserved for military celebrations, was filled with representatives from every species in the Galactic Alliance. But today, they weren't here to honor warriors. Tom Miller stood uncomfortably in his yellow safety uniform, now adorned with the newly created Galactic Safety Medal. Beside him, Anne Walker wore her own medal over her research uniform. Neither had wanted this ceremony, but as Commander Ross had said, some things need to be remembered. "We are here today," Ross announced to the assembled crowd, "to recognize not just two individuals, but a fundamental truth about courage that we, the warrior races, had forgotten." The main screen showed images from the crisis. The quantum cascade contained billions evacuated safely, entire civilizations preserved, all because two humans had insisted on being careful. When the cascade began, Ross continued, "Our greatest warriors rushed to fight it. They died bravely but accomplished nothing. Yet these humans, whom we mocked as cowards, had already prepared the solutions we needed." Chief Engineer Parker skittered forward, his crystalline medallion clicking against his carapace. "The Engineering Council has officially adopted human safety protocols as the new galactic standard. Every station, ship, and colony will now have backup systems for their backup systems." Tom shifted awkwardly as Parker continued. "We analyzed Station Delta's survival rate during the crisis. Human safety measures made it 47 times more likely to survive than identical stations without them." The crowd murmured in amazement. Stations that had once rejected human safety inspections now competed to implement them. Anne stepped forward to present her findings. "The quantum cascade taught us something vital about the nature of courage. True bravery isn't about fearlessly charging into danger. Sometimes, the bravest act is being willing to look overcautious in order to protect others." The screen changed to show the new galactic emergency response protocols, all based on human models. Every ship would now carry emergency supplies. Every station would have multiple backup systems. Every crew would train for disasters that seemed impossible. "In 1 month," Ross announced, "we've seen a 60% decrease in spacecraft accidents, simply by implementing basic human safety protocols." Tom finally spoke up. "We don't prepare for everything because we're afraid," he explained. "We prepare because we refuse to be helpless. That's what humanity learned through countless disasters on Earth. That preparation isn't cowardice. It's taking responsibility." The chamber erupted in applause. Species that had once seen humans as the weakest race now saw them differently. Not as warriors, but as guardians. Not as fearless, but as wise. "The contained cascade will serve as a research station," Anne announced. "We'll study it, learn from it, and prepare for anything similar. Because that's what humans do. We learn, we prepare, we survive. After the ceremony, Tom and Annie stood at their favorite observation window. The quantum dampener network glowed faintly in the distance, holding the now peaceful cascade in its gentle grip. "They're calling it the human method now," Anne said, smiling. "Planning for disasters before they happen, having backup plans for backup plans. And backup backups for the backup plans," Tom added with a small grin. Commander Ross approached them, his scales gleaming in the starlight. "The Council has approved your proposal, Safety Inspector. Every major station will now have a human safety division, with full authority to implement protocols." Tom asked. "Full authority," Ross confirmed. "No one will mock human caution again. Not after what we saw." Through the window, they could see ships approaching the station. Each one now carried emergency supplies, backup systems, and detailed safety procedures. Each one followed carefully plotted routes with multiple alternatives. Each one represented a galaxy forever changed by human foresight. "You know what the best part is," Anne said quietly. "They finally understand. We're not careful because we're afraid. We're careful because we care." Tom nodded, watching a new ship dock using proper safety procedures. His yellow uniform didn't draw stares anymore. Instead, it drew respect. The galaxy had learned what humanity had always known, that true courage wears many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take every precaution to keep others safe. In the distance, the contained cascade pulsed softly, a reminder that the universe held many dangers. But now, thanks to human wisdom, the galaxy was ready to face them. Not fearlessly, but carefully. Not recklessly, but responsibly. The human way.